Okay, guys, I've been really excited about this for some time. We have 4 panelists here who are all true leaders within the sports industry, within different industry segments. So going this way, Rob Alberino is the Vice President and Executive Producer of the 49ers. Tom Masterman is the Chief Revenue Officer at Sportradar. Bill Sanders, Senior Vice President of Accel Sports Management. And then Jason Mayden, who's the designer for Accel Partners and actually is the guy responsible for designing the Jordan shoes. So I think the best way to get started is just for each of you guys to say a couple minutes just about what you're doing and more about your business.
Want me to start? First of all, thanks for having me here. Actually, I definitely know I'm the dumbest guy in this room. There are a lot of smart kids in this room. So I have been in the league for 20 years in the NFL. I was with the Philadelphia Eagles for 14 years. I was with the Kansas City Chiefs for 3, both in vice presidential roles. And I arrived here in 2013 to be a part of the 49ers. Prior to that, I was the youngest filmmaker in NFL Films' history. So I really am a content person. And football has, basically I'm unemployable in any other business with the exception of football. So I have, everything I've ever done has really revolved around that. My job is very simple. Anything that moves and makes sound, I'm a part of. So currently, I assume the role of 5 different verticals at the 49ers. Production, game day production, all social media, all platforms, 49ers.com as well, so social and digital marketing, fan experience, which is also wrapped up into basic core marketing. So those pieces are all the pieces that I'm in charge of. So I'm really the hand-to-hand combat person when it comes to fans, connecting with folks in the area and connecting with folks at the league, and sort of pushing our message to everyone.
Can you tell us a little bit about what the 49ers do? So obviously you know a lot about his company. So Sportradar, for many years outside the U.S., at least 15 years, Sportradar's been the worldwide leader in providing real-time data and analytics to the betting market. They've done very well at that. They knew that to truly grow in sport, they need to get into digital sports, media, brands. We had a startup in Minneapolis that was creating real-time statistics and real-time data for the media market. So Sportradar acquired my company about 2.5 years ago. Sportradar is heavily involved in the startup community, so it's great to be here. What we are essentially is a real-time data provider to anyone who does anything in sports, because really all these sports apps at the core start with data. So we're working with social media, we're working with the teams, we're working with lots of brands, we're working with OEMs, we're working with lots of other acronyms, MVPDs, the OTT groups. I think for us, it's all about helping these guys create high-value fan experiences. So for us, getting access to the best raw materials is key, which is why we are partnering with all the leagues that we can. We work with the NFL, we're the official data provider. Same with NASCAR, same with NHL, and soon to be others. The goal is to get the data that's coming off the pitch, off the venue, and then to put some context to that and get real-time distribution to anybody. We do that through a easy-to-use RESTful API. On top of the feeds, we also built a lot of analytics layers and content widgets that you can work with us at all different layers. You can either take our feeds or you can take a finished product.
Hi, I'm Bill, and I oversee the marketing group at a sports representation agency called Accel Sports Management. And I'm biased, but I think that we're really among the best in the industry. Got an incredible roster. Blake Griffin, Kevin Love, Derek Jeter, Danica Patrick, Peyton Manning. It goes on, and I can't take credit for any of that because they were all there before I got there. But I was brought in to oversee the marketing group, and most of you know that in team sports, tremendous amount of revenue driven by the team contracts, and the agents do that work. And then more and more, the off the court or off the field revenue is becoming more important, and building athletes as brands is super critical, especially through the work that our company does with Nike and Jordan and lots of other brand affiliations. So I get to work and oversee that group. I'm excited to be here for a couple of reasons. I think that sports continues to change and grow and emerge, and I think what we're going to see in the next 10 years, especially on the athlete side, more and more engagement on the part of athletes with startups and equity opportunities, investment opportunities, things like that. The traditional endorsement deals are always going to be there for the superstar athletes, but if you're Blake Griffin and you're making a lot of money both on the court and from Nike and from some of your other partners, at some point you do want to have equity in something. And when you see in the talent representation world, Jessica Alba, The Honest Company, Oprah Winfrey, and Weight Watchers, lots of examples of influencers getting more involved as partners and rather than as paid spokespeople. Before I came to Accel, spent about 16 years working with Yao Ming, and he's still a client of mine. I still get to work with him, fortunately, and the only reason I really bring that up is that I saw what happened in China when it was really exploding, and when you're working with a guy like that, you get to see it firsthand. And now I almost feel like we're at a point where some of that explosion that happened there is happening here because sports is so critical and so important. We were talking earlier about time shifting and commercial skipping and things like that, and broadcast rights exploding. And I think there's so much room for sports to run. It is the deepest loyalty that we have as consumers or fans. I'm a lifelong, I apologize in advance, lifelong Pittsburgh Steelers fan. And I'll never change that loyalty. I might switch from Mini Cooper to Lexus or something like that, but I'll always be loyal to my favorite sports team, and that's true of most of us. And so for brands and advertisers and startups to get involved in sports, to borrow on some of that passion and fan loyalty is something that I'm proud to sort of get to play in a little bit, and I'm really happy to be here today and look forward to talking to all of you.
My name is Jason Mayden. I can confirm Accel is one of the better partners to work with dealing with athletes. So for 14 years, I ran various groups at Nike. The one that they mentioned earlier was designed for Jordan Brand. So I had the good fortune of working with Derek Jeter and Blake and Melo and CP and MJ himself. I'm originally from Chicago, so I'm a loyal Bears fan. So to work with Michael was like, my parents finally realized I didn't work at Foot Locker. They understood I was working with athletes. But then left in around 2010, went to business school at Stanford and formed a company that was focused on muscle myography, so how your fast-twitch muscles actually work. And then that actually led me back to Nike to be a founding member of Digital Sport, where we did the Fuel Band, the Nike Plus reinvention. Then Mr. Jordan heard I was back in the building and requested that I come back to Jordan Brand, and you don't say no to him. So I went back to Jordan to build out a predictive analytics practice, led innovation and design, and then was interim general manager of performance basketball for 2 years. My son had gotten sick during that time period, which, if anybody is a parent, the first thing that you focus on and your priority should be your child. And so I walked away from my dream job to step into my real job, which is being a quality husband and a quality father. Upon that decision, Stanford recruited me back to be a lecturer and professor at the design school. And I jumped into a couple of startups that were focused on hardware, particularly in the sensor space, to use spectroscopy to understand ingredients that may trigger allergic reactions in food, and then was recruited away to Accel Partners to help build out their design practice. Formed a startup with Steph Curry and a couple other people, and recently transitioned into an advisor role with them to build my own company that is targeting a gap in the market that I see with performance products, particularly for the youth. So I'm delighted to be here. Normally, it's very hard to get together in the Bay Area for sports and sport-related things. So I'm glad that I'm not a fish out of water. I'm a fish in the right pond at this moment. So thank you guys for putting this on.
Awesome. That was very loud. Okay, so that brings me to my next question, and the kind of topic about tonight's event is the future of sports. So I want to know where you guys see the future of sports, not necessarily in the next couple of years, but in the next 15, 20 years. Like Striver, one company we're going to have present today, is working with a number of NFL teams for sports training. There's predictions that autonomous driving will take over the parking lots at several stadiums. There might even be a third venue to watch games. So what are the predictions you guys see that are coming up?
That's a super broad question, and we can answer it in a lot of different ways. I think answering it with actually using Striver, who we met with. They have a really, really good product. We talked with them. For us, content is king, and I think that Saeed mentioned that there are teams that make the NFL. Just to give everybody, Tom had the joke that, what do the 49ers do? The NFL is a whale in the United States, but outside of the United States, I mean, we traveled to London. I spent a bunch of time talking with a lot of the EPL teams over in Europe about how they do content, and they don't necessarily do content very well, but their following is massive. Their following is massive. I mean, 10x, 12x what the 49ers have, and we're one of the leaders in the NFL. You look at specifically some historical teams, the Steelers, by the way. I went to school and lived in Pittsburgh for 10 years, so I have some love for the Steelers too. But the 49ers pay my mortgage, so go Niners. Our following is not as great as some of these teams, the Man U's, Man Cities, those type of teams, but our engagement and our content is exceptional. And I think that inevitably that is the one place, because and it was said a couple of times, emotion drives sports, and it is an emotional buy. It is something. I always say to people, the thing I love about sports is it's driven on hope. Every year, it gets reset. The scores are 0-0. So going into the year, you could have the worst year, which, by the way, we haven't had 2 very good years back to back. But headed into this year, there's new storylines, and that's sort of what drives us. That content drives us, and I think that leads me to the fact that content, anything content-driven, is going to keep sports alive above and beyond it's really the last bastion of good TV. Live sports is the one thing that is appointment TV for people. So that's the one thing that's going to drive you to that television. Everything else is driving us to tablets and things like that. But content that's ancillary to that, that's off the field, is huge for us. And for instance, Striver, to go back to them, they're sharing content between the source and the athletes. It's a really interesting thing because, content and imagery is being driven so much by teams, but it's also, some of these athletes are incredibly fun to follow. You literally look at these guys and they're iconic, and some of them are witty, some of them are sharp, some of them are their own managers, some of them have managers, but that content brings you back all the time. I mean, it's entertainment. So I myself am always looking for something where content specifically helps us, and content that can be viewed on phones and tablets helps me as a game presenter, as the executive producer of the game. I have a huge problem. I'm trying to keep butts in seats, as opposed to being at home where you could watch it on your 80-inch TV, you can go to your fridge as much as you want, you can go take a pee, you can get up, you can pause, you can do all these things, where at the game, I want to offer people something that they can't get. So we're working with products that really enhance the actual game and push content to the game, numbers, data, super important to us, and I can see that, certainly evolving, because for those of you who are sports fans of any sport, that sitting in an arena and audially and physically being able to enjoy the game, there's nothing like it. Some of the greatest moments I've ever been weren't watching a TV. They were physically sitting and watching a game, being a part of a game, and they're moments in time that I cherish. If I could link that with being able to create experiences or understand cool things about an athlete or engage with the actual gameplay, that's where I believe things are headed, certainly on the content and device level.
So I guess a couple things come to mind. The first is, for us, player tracking, so unlocking new sources of data, whether it's speed and motion on the field, or it's biometrics or biomechanics. I think it comes from people wanting to know more than just how many points LeBron James scored, but how he scored it, why he's successful, why did somebody not make the All-Star team, why does somebody have a better career than someone else. So what we have invested a lot in, starting with the NFL, is the next-gen statistics. RFID chips placed on your shoulder pads it's sending signals out in Levi's to our systems, and we're translating that into things like acceleration, speed, And the goal is really to tell new stories. So, take an offensive lineman, they're just getting measured by games started, games played. Now we can start to look at the spatial relation in the trenches to start to tell new stories about, who is truly a good offensive lineman. Same thing with maybe a receiver. They don't get many targets or many receptions, but they're running the routes really well. So the thought is by collecting new types of data, it's going to influence, who gets drafted, who makes the Pro Bowl, and who makes the Hall of Fame in the future. It'll be different than the statistics we have now. Another piece is, I guess one side point is that it's somewhat impressive or amazing that the NFL has kind of approved the dissemination of this somewhat personal data. I think a lot of it comes from the fact that, especially young people, we're getting more and more accustomed to tracking everything. We want to know about our own performance. So I think that the future fans are going to expect when they see someone run down the field or someone go dunk a ball, they're going to be thinking about other numbers than just the fact that 2 points were scored. And so I think whether you're looking at like the Nike Plus or Map My Fitness, they're so accustomed to capturing their own data. They want to see that at the pro level. They want to compete with themselves. They want to compete with people in their demographic, their geographics, the people they went to high school with, and they want to know how their workout routine maybe matches a professional player. So I think for us, it's going to be working with those data collectors to collect the data and add some context to it to start to help them tell stories. I think, really quickly, another thing is virtual reality and augmented reality. I think it comes from people wanting a personalized experience and to have an immersive experience. So whether it's Strive or NextVR companies we've been talking to, they're trying to sort it out still, but there's this idea that I don't want to always just watch the linear broadcast. Sometimes I want to be just on the 16th green, and I want to experience what that feels like. But to really linger on that product, you're going to need more than just the sound and looking around. You're going to need to answer the questions that somebody has when they're looking at that green, like how's everybody done today? What's the speed of the green? Who's that golfer I just saw hit? I want to look him up. So they're taking off those devices and they're doing searches. And what we want to do is provide the data to kind of add the context to that. And with augmented reality, I think you could be at a game, and someone gets up to bat. Again, you watch everyone rush to their phones because they're trying to answer questions that are popping in their head. We want to provide the data that's kind of overlaid on those experiences. So you're starting to, you're looking out there and you're watching to see where all the balls have been sprayed today, or someone's lining up for a field goal, and you're looking to see based on the wind that maybe you can see come across your phone what might happen when this guy lines up. Or even like, say, going back to baseball, a guy who's not a power hitter is getting up. There's a runner at third. There's one out. The wind is blowing out. How much does that wind potentially impact this guy's ability to fly out and this guy to tag up? Like, that's the kind of stuff I think you can get through, a smart integration of data into those traditional experiences.
There's 2 or 3 things that come to mind, and I'll be quick. One is I cannot wait to see, as a sports fan, the improvement in performance of athletes as more and more of this data becomes, easier for them to understand and analyze. I was talking earlier to someone and saying that, it's amazing that $100 million basketball players can shoot less than 50% from the free throw line. That is geometry, right? And if you guys could see how some of the teams in some of the sports approach physical therapy or training, et cetera, still very antiquated. So I think we're going to see this exponential growth in athlete performance based on the work you guys are doing. I can't wait just as a fan to see it. The other thing I'm excited to see is improved experience at the stadiums, because I hear lots of folks who are experts at professional teams. They recognize that it's 2 totally separate experiences. You're going to watch the game at home, and they enhance that as best they can with multiple screens and with improved broadcasts and all that stuff. But then the experience going to the game, as new venues come online, I haven't been to Levi Stadium. If anybody can hook me up with some tickets at the 49ers, that'd be sweet, because I hear it's phenomenal. And in LA, we have a football team, and in a couple of years, we'll have a new venue, and I can't wait to see it. So some of the new 21st century venues are going to be remarkable. And the third thing that I think about is I have a 15-year-old son at home who's a more rabid sport fan than I ever was, and he knows much more about my own clients' statistics than I do, and he never watches games. It is unbelievable to me. He will watch the Steelers, because if he wants to stay in the will, on Sunday we do have our appointments, But we're also Dodger fans in our house, and he's a Warriors fan, and he loves all my clients, and he knows statistics like crazy. But I don't need League Pass at home. If I didn't work in the business, I wouldn't need NBA League Pass at home because my son doesn't watch the games. He didn't watch a single Warriors game, but he knew what they were doing and knew they were going to win their championship when they did. So how are 15-year-olds, the fans of the future, going to consume the sport and not, not rely on television broadcasts to do that? It's already happening, but I have no clue how he's going to consume sports when he's an adult. He's a fan now, but he does not watch games. So it'll be interesting to see how that evolves as well.
For me, I think starting with the athletic body as the foundation of how the sport will evolve itself, as you mentioned, is critical, because when you think about the inputs that they now have, from genomics to the cognitive development to understanding sleep patterns and hydration and all these different factors that contribute to athleticism, you'll see an advancement in the way that athletes move. One thing that we noticed through predictive analytics was that the notion that a position is where you start to innovate for an athlete is no longer relevant. It's their style of play because of the cultural nuances of where people come from. So we live in a borderless world, so you're seeing people who have better hip rotation because they grew up in Latin America and they come here playing soccer first and switching to basketball. People have this notion of global influence but local relevance, so you're going to see two sport athletes in very different ways with very different movement patterns, with very different ways of competing, very different definitions of success. So one good example of that is the way that Ben Simmons moves on the court. He's a motorcycle amongst cars. He could not have developed in the U.S. with his biomechanical movement in the same way. Being outside of the U.S., having different cultural influences, understanding that he is an athlete, not a basketball player, multidimensional. You're asterisk now. You're not a T-type athlete. You don't play one sport. You play in general. We're going to see competitiveness increase because people are going to move differently. They're going to be more efficient. They're going to be aware of the gains that they receive by taking less steps on the court or taking less swings at bat, because we're seeing an increase in injury at an earlier age. At the same time, we're seeing an increase in sport participation, and we're seeing an increase in our ability to design for the body in motion. So when technology meets a person's willingness to compete, you see singularity in the same way they talk about singularity in regular tech. It's happening now where companies like Nike and their competitors, who I won't mention, still loyal 24/7, they now have the bodies to design for, because at one point technology was moving faster than the athlete's ability to keep up with it. Now athletes understand that it's cognitive development, physical development, emotional development, and social and cultural influences. So we're not going to see athletes anymore in the same light. They're going to be entertainers. In the same way we see musicians and artists, they're going to be multidimensional. And that's the exciting piece, because the sports itself is great, but the culture of sport will change the way that we think about the world. And you're seeing that in the Olympics with the conversations that are happening off the track or off the soccer pitch or away from the mat. People talking about very big topics. So sport in and of itself will be the way that this planet evolves the conversation around diversity, inclusion, and advancement of human potential. And that for me is exciting, because when you see a body in motion, it is the greatest culmination of what we could achieve as a people when we collectively decide to align ourselves against one mission. You see that when a person runs the 100. Usain Bolt is the hope and dream of this generation. When you see what he did, and he did that with a smile on his face and stopped to take a selfie in the middle of winning a gold medal, that's exactly what our children are watching. So they live in an age where anything is possible, and sports represents that. So I'm excited to see how people use the principles of athleticism in other industries to change the way that we think about what's possible.
Great. And one of the things you mentioned was the Olympics, and obviously that's a big thing right now. What are some technologies that you see that can really give an advantage for sports? I'm sure you guys have worked with some technologies, and there's quite a few startups here that, if they're implemented by a sports team or an athlete, they'll give the athlete a major advantage. Can you talk about some things coming up or technology?
I would say you need to start. That's, yeah.
I mean, from a technology standpoint, I think we're going to see mobile computer vision really help with coaching and understanding of biomechanical movements and patterns. You still have the coach telling you, oh, your form is off. That will be replaced by what I call augmented intelligence, not augmented reality, but augmented intelligence, helping the coach to make better decisions around when to pull someone out of the game, when to put them in the game. So understanding the body heat mapping in real time. That's the holy grail of a sport. Can I have that video game meter of energy and understand how to take my athlete out at the right moment? Because there is an apex of performance physically, and that's when the heart kicks in. And so you're going to see people that understand how to train for the fourth quarter performance. Secondly, you're going to see the emergence of nutraceuticals and how those play a big part in athlete recovery and development. multi-time released, temporal component released, vitamins and nutrients. Now they have access to better food. People think that athletes eat well. They eat like crap. Most of the teams don't invest in the health side of playing. They invest in the fact that, hey, get out there and perform. But when you look at the diets and the habits, the fact that someone, I'm not going to name him, but a person in the NBA continuously gets injured because he only drinks Mountain Dew. It's ridiculous. Your body cannot survive on Mountain Dew alone. But yet this man received a lot of money, and he's constantly pulling ACLs and MCLs, and his back is severely injured because of dehydration. So now that there's better information about the core benefits of food and how hydration plays in recovery, athletes can make better choices. And I think the third piece is that, when they talk about statistics and data, I see a monetization path for athletes now to negotiate the usage of their stats in unique ways. Because as these experiences grow, the most valuable thing they create and generate is the data itself. So technically, that's intellectual property for the athlete. And when they start to build that into the way to negotiate their value, like, no, you can't use my stats in a video game without licensing my stats. No, you cannot use XYZ highlight without licensing my highlight and paying me royalties every time it's shown on social media. They're going to get really clever and realize that the intellectual property is their play. Not just their name, not just their logo, but the fact that they can produce something that's valuable, which is data, will be a new monetization path for them. So it's going to be a physical development, it's going to be a dietary development, and it's going to be an overall monetary development for how athletes create value for teams and for society.
I'd just add to that, too, that as athlete representatives, we know that, injury prevention, injury is just, and as sports fans, we know this, that when your favorite player goes down, the season's over. We represent Clayton Kershaw, and he was having an MVP season, and now he's down, and it's just heartbreaking. And so I'm hoping that technology helps with that, and I totally agree with what you said about performance enhancement as well. As human beings, we don't have a dashboard. If I wake up feeling crummy, I'm guessing, did I have a nightmare? Did I eat something bad? Am I allergic to something? I have no idea why I feel crummy today. And athletes are not much different, and they have the training staffs and all this, but again, the work you guys are doing to help an athlete understand why I'm not feeling well today, why was I slower today than yesterday. I still think that there will be variance in terms of athletes who use that information and don't. Like, we all know now you shouldn't drink Mountain Dew or eat junk food, or maybe, there's all sorts of substance stuff like that. If an athlete, one of my clients I used to represent was Steve Nash, and that guy treated his body like a temple. The only reason he overachieved as much as he did is he worked harder than everybody else, and he treated his body like a temple. And he would name other clients to me and say, like, I won't say names, but he'd say, if that guy had half my work ethic, he'd be MVP of the league. So there's still that variance, but the guys that utilize the information are going to continue to get better.
Yeah, I think, so I agree with your points about kind of the privacy of the data. I think that there needs to be an incentive for people to release their information. So I think if we start by anonymizing information and we say, and this starts with what we're collecting with the NFL, we want to track more information about you. We want to track your heart rate, your body temperature, and this is how we're going to start. You let us track that. You and your agent and the people you choose, they're allowed to see your information, but the rest is going to be aggregated and anonymized, because I think that, we'll take some horrible athlete like myself. When you're collecting your Map My Ride data, the only context I have is myself. And I think that, I know they have so much data. I know that Under Armour's invested in working with IBM Watson, but I think a real big part of it is, do we agree that it's worth, that there's a benefit to all of us sharing a lot more information? And I think that it's gonna be about people feeling like it's worth it and that they'll be protected. I think we're dealing with right now with our NFL data. There's concern that if we let out too much of the next-gen stats, it's going to be used against them. But I say that on the other side of the coin, it's going to be used just as much for them, like any stat. Right now we're looking at things. Someone clap for me? Right now we're using things like, touchdowns and targets. That's a very small amount of data. So I think if we can start to understand that data is data, and it can be used for good, it can be used for bad. So I guess my summarizing of it would be, we need to prove that sharing that information is going to be valuable. And I think if everyone in the gym shared their information, you could decide if you wanted to compete for burning the most calories in the next hour. You could say, I'll give you my information and my demographics, but you can't share who I am. Or maybe I'll sit out and I just want to watch it. But I think that that's where it's going to go, is that we're going to be, over time, if people do it responsibly, seeing the benefits of all that heart rate, biometric stuff, because it's going to allow, I think, a kid to see the value of following the same path as, say, a Steve Nash or someone that they might say is anonymized. So that's my thought.
I think all those points are unbelievable, and with the next-gen stats specifically, for those of you who are unaware of what next-gen stats are, basically they're measuring all things that aren't, what's the best way for me to say, like an athletic, like something that rounds up score or yards, right? It's basically velocity, and if somebody runs from here to there, it's 20 yards, but if they run from here to there and they make a bunch of moves, it's maybe 29 yards. So I think the cool thing about next-gen stats are it does really measure the truth of the athlete as opposed to what you see on a stat sheet. I just wanted to make that clear because I think that's cool. You made some really great points, and the only thing I can add differently from what these guys are adding is, and I'll use the example for Striver again, is the VR piece. We're actually working very heavy in AR and very heavy in VR, so if we talk about that, I'll have some pieces. But the VR piece has allowed an athlete to see himself, and maybe globally from a team end, a coach to physically put himself in front of an athlete where he can't normally be. So it really allows you to see things in ways that are helping these athletes grow, to train a little bit differently, maybe twitch movements that they didn't realize that they're making, movements that are giving away. Every player has a poker face, and his poker face is his body. And there were times, I'll give you an example of what I'm saying. In 2004, so long ago, the statute of limitations are probably in effect. We played the Atlanta Falcons, and I was with the Philadelphia Eagles at the time. The center for the Falcons, when it was a run play, was cocking the football in his snap. The center's the guy who snaps the ball, right? So he was cocking his football on a run play to give it to the quarterback a little differently so he could then hand it to the running back. When it was a pass play, it was straight on. And I'm not really sure why. It was just his poker face. And I actually had a camera on the ground, a podium camera, which is about our height, looking straight at the field. I could see that center every time. And I actually noticed it. I noticed it, I want to say in the first quarter, I noticed it. And I remember saying to myself, they're literally going to, he was telegraphing that play. He was and I was amazed that his coaches weren't telling him. So we were showing, I'm the director of the game. I was showing it on the big boards to give my team an advantage. And I would show that ball, and then I would show the run, show the ball, show the run. And at that time, my running backs coach, Ted Williams, he was figuring it out. And even more so, he was telling our defensive coaches, we ended up winning that game and going to the Super Bowl and getting beat by the cheating Patriots. But that's not part of the story. The story is, now we can see, hopefully it was out live. Good. Okay, I'll make sure I send that to New England. But hopefully, now we're seeing these things. We're seeing these guys do these things in high-speed action. And to be honest, being able to go around and be able to check things out, it's amazing for me because they actually have rooms now that they go into after practice. They put on VR. They kind of feel their world around. It's a whole nother world. I mean, it is long gone from the days when I grew up with football. I'm amazed at what they can do. I'm amazed at what the knowledge that you gentlemen have, but you put all those things together, and superior athletes are being risen, and to be honest, the frauds are being exposed because of it.
So when do you think that the combine, as we know it, with the bench press and the jump and the picture of Tom Brady running with the baggy T-shirt, like when are they going to get rid of that completely? And it's going to be the striver. They're going to do a simulation there, where they're going to be measuring the last 20 weeks of their biometrics, and that's how they're going to make their pick.
Who would have thought, for the NFL fans in here, that we would watch 3.5 days of dudes running and jumping? That is, it's unbelievable. It is, but I'll tell you what, you talk about content. You talk about pillars of content, to take a little left tangent for a second. The NFL used to be training camp, preseason, and then the season. And then it was over for a good 5 months, and people would ask me, like your pops and mom would say to you, hey, dude, do you work at Foot Locker? People would be like, what are you doing for 6 months? Like, I'm working every single day now because it's Senior Bowl, Combine, all these pillars. I don't get any time off. But when is that going to go away? I don't know if it'll ever go away. I think it'll actually be accented, amplified by all the things that, that we're doing, by all the data that you guys are working on, can you imagine when they finally start putting chips in shoulders and knees and legs? And I mean, it'll be down to the millimeter as opposed to the inch, right? The verts and things. So it's pretty intense.
Yeah, that's
On that, if you don't mind, because I'm fascinated by this. In the NBA and the NFL, one of these days I want to spend some time and try and figure out what is the success rate of a top 3 draft pick. Very low, right? So it must be somewhere. But whatever it is, like at football fans, how many number 1 draft picks have been bust or not renewed with their teams? In the NBA, we represented several, anybody remember Michael Oluwakandi? Like, we had lots of number 1 picks that just didn't work out. And why is it that still is the case? And at what point does technology reduce the risk of a number 1 pick being a bust?
I mean, I think just to add to that, that's a great question. I see guys, Steve Nash is one of my favorite players growing up, and I agree. You can't measure a guy's heart, right? That's really cliche, but you really can't measure a guy's heart. And guys who are unbelievable athletes, but some of these guys aren't bigger than me. I'm 5'10". Some of these, Deshaun Jackson, who was with the Eagles, that guy was literally the Flash. You can't measure these guys. He was like a $169, $175. And then you get these guys, there's actually a football term. There's a guy called a carp. A carp is a really good-looking fish, beautiful fish. You can't do anything with it. There's big, giant athletes who are great-looking guys, and they call them carps because you can't do anything with them. I don't know how. I think it is going to be able to disseminate. This is going to help be able to bridge the gap even more.
and one thing I'd like to jump into.
You can measure heart.
You can do it.
I want to hear this.
So one of the things that we did at Nike was, this has always been the biggest task. Like, how do you measure willingness to compete is how we would qualify the term heart. And essentially, you have to go about 2 to 3 generations back and measure at what point in time was that person exposed to an adversity, because truly these athletes who compete at that level, they have developed mental fortitude because of near misses, is what the Malcolm Gladwell term is, meaning a tragic event, something where they had to stand up to an opposition, something that challenged their willingness to go out and stand in the face of an adversary. So the earlier in life they do that, the more they develop that as a behavior. So when you have an obstacle, you're more likely to self-calibrate towards success, which is hard. So you think about Kobe growing up in Europe playing with adults, right? He didn't play with kids from the U.S. So it wasn't a social activity. For him, it was a competitive endeavor. So he had to grow up. He had to develop the will to compete. You look at Michael not being picked. You look at Carmelo being called chubby when he was a child. So all these things happened that it was a choice that was made from that person to develop, mental fortitude, and it was a choice that was made by their parents to support that. So you have to look at, the intellectual, you have to look at the education level of the parents, you have to look at how soon the child or the athlete has been exposed to adversity, and then it gives you, within a certain range of certainty, the ability to say that this person will actually stand up in those difficult athletic endeavors, because 99% of athletic performance at a certain point is mental. And physical, when you get to the NFL, NBA, Major League Baseball, everybody's a great athlete, but it's the guys who can outthink the competitors, it's the women who can outthink that win in the end. And so we spent a lot of time doing psychological analysis and evaluation of emotional and cognitive development, and when these athletes were exposed to trauma and how did it affect or change them. Because there is a change that happens. It's the fight or flight syndrome. So once they establish that their reaction, their core reaction is to fight, you see that in the face of a Kobe. You see that in the face of, of a Jeter. And you just see that in the face of Allison Felix and how fierce she looked. And she was, even though she was happy that, she came in with the silver medal, she was still competing in her mind. She should have won that gold medal. So there are ways to quantify and qualify heart, but you need a better data set that isn't the normalized stats that we capture today. You need to capture contextual data. You need to capture family data. You need to capture, more emotional development data. So it's understanding the story in order to qualify and quantify heart.
Yeah, and Bill, I remember we introduced you to Emotive, and we've introduced the NFL and quite a few corporations to them, and they're actually our first company to present, and they're a headset where you can actually detect exactly what's happening in someone's brain and their brain activity and focus. So measuring that in a combine is a total new set of things you can test. So that's another area to look into. And the next question, and we have to wrap up. I know some people flew in for this event, and we want to respect the startup's time too. So maybe I'll ask one more question and one quick question from the audience if time. But maybe you can tell me more about some startups you guys have worked with. What's your experience with startups? are you guys looking to invest in startups, do pilots with them? Love to hear more.
Yeah, we most certainly are looking to invest in startups. We actually have a business development group, which actually turned me on to this wonderful group of folks. Oops, sorry. We have a business development group that turned me on to the folks here, and we look at a lot of things. As a matter of fact, I get 4 or 5 things put across my desk, almost every week. It's a little tougher during the season, but some of the groups that we're working with, because VR is a big portion of what we do, what we want to do, more importantly, one of the companies we're working with is Zeality, for instance. Zeality is a place for us to host our VR content. We're looking to shoot a lot more VR content, so it's kind of a really cool place for us because the NFL platform doesn't really allow us to shoot 360 stereoscopic or monoscopic. Obviously, we can do some stuff on Facebook, but nothing that you can physically put a headset on and see it well. So that's kind of a cool way for us to delve into the market and give our fans a little bit of a look at things. From other startups, I mean, honestly, there's a bunch that come across the desk. It has to make sense for us. It has to make sense for our fans. Again, the tie-in to the game, the tie-in to experiencing the game from the stadium is important when we're looking at that too. The VR experience for us is for those fans who aren't in the Bay Area, who want to experience the game, but we're not actually playing the game live in there. It's mostly behind-the-scenes content. But we're very open to ideas, and we're looking all the time. That's actually the best part about being in Silicon Valley, as opposed to Philadelphia, Kansas City, or the other 29 teams.
So as a B2B company, we don't typically take the approach of investing in a company because we obviously have hundreds and hundreds of different customers. So what we've done from the very beginning is created an open API where all our data is available for anyone to come in. So anyone can come in anytime, get a trial key, and access, like for example, live MLB data tonight. We thought that looking at our competitors, they required you to sign NDAs, they required you to put money up front. I think out of necessity, we couldn't do that. We decided that we would put all our data out there and allow people to come in. So we've done that, and I think we've had, maybe 2,000-3,000 developers in the last year playing around with the data. Most of the fantasy sports companies or any sports startup you see, they're probably using our information. We've also gone out and sponsored just about every sports tech meetup you could find. There's one here in San Francisco. Seattle has one, DC has one, New York has one, Austin has one, Toronto has one. There's now actually one in Minneapolis where we're located. So the idea there is just to cultivate that relationship, because the next major, whatever, Bleacher Report or Game On, for example, that's a customer. They're looking for some help to get started. So we don't offer them seed funding. What we do is offer them low friction access to our data so they can get started.
So our company was involved in the launch of the Players Tribune. If anybody know the Players Tribune? Derek Jeter's startup that's a sports information platform where the athletes are writing in the first person. A lot of skeptics really said it was never going to work, and I find the content super compelling, and the athletes are really comfortable because they get final cut basically on the articles that get posted. I think our responsibility as athlete representatives is to build a portfolio of opportunities for our clients, and there's always going to be what I would call the blue chips, which are the paid endorsements from Nike and from Gatorade and the major brands. But I think that the way the world is moving, as I said before, there's going to be more need. Our clients are going to expect us to find them equity opportunities. I did have many years ago, a mentor said that agents who represent or who recommend investments get fired. So agents are very adverse to saying to a client, you might want to invest in this, because our job is to generate revenue for them. They have investment advisors who, recommend how they should invest their money. But that said, there's more and more equity opportunities coming up where either it's a royalty or a rev share or a percentage of the business, and we're going to have to look at more and more opportunities like that as part of the athletes' portfolios. So again, it's why I'm here, is that I love meeting companies like the ones that are here today, and I'm sure there's going to be opportunities where I am comfortable saying to a client, I think you should take a look at this, let's take an equity piece in this, see if we can help them. So I think that it's still early and agents are adverse to recommending those kinds of things, but we're moving in that direction.
So for Accel, it's an actual venture capital firm, so it's the core business of what they do. So it makes it super easy to answer that question. But I think one thing that isn't well regarded, or excuse me, well documented about the firm is that a majority of its partners have backgrounds in D1 athletics or a huge affinity for sport. So Accel invested in Huddle, which is a well-known platform that unlocks opportunities for athletes that were otherwise be overlooked. And so it's a pretty interesting time because, once again, sports is a bridge. It's a central point that a lot of industries revolve around, so it's always ever present, whether it's hardware investments and things like DJI, which is a drone company, and now you think about the camera angles you can see being akin to a video game through the fact that you can use a drone to capture game footage. That's fascinating. Or the Huddle platform, which provides video content to recruiters and also people, can display their talents and their abilities. So Accel's philosophy is really focused on founders that have that humble and hungry attitude and spirit, but also have domain expertise or see a unique opportunity in an inefficient market. So it's really about efficiency gains and technology being a way to unlock that. So if you're interested in approaching a firm like an Accel, it really comes down to how did you identify this market? What is the inefficient portion of the market that you're attacking, and then why you as a founder? Beyond just being a fan of sport, how do you plan on providing value and improving people's lives through sport? Because if it's just about the monetary gain, then that's probably not the place you want to go, because it's more than just the money, it's the meaning, and it's a combination of ethics and opportunity that we look for in future entrepreneurs that we stand behind. So I do agree, I won't name any competitors, out of respect for Accel, the sports management firm, but you start to see some of the other firms spin out venture arms and do mergers and acquisitions, which is a unique place. Now, they may not do it, full time, but they see that there is a need because athletes should not be giving their money to their friend to go and do an investment. They should work with investment professionals or help their friends become trained to become investment professionals, because you can have a sea of opportunities that are thrown your way, but having someone to filter and discern what's right for your personal brand and your own personal plan for your life beyond sport is critical and essential. So I think you're going to start to see VC firms and sports agencies merge in different ways, and then you'll see athletes taking the seat of being a LP in a fund itself. You see it with Carmelo, you see it with DJ, with Derek. You're seeing it with with a few other big name athletes that are getting out now, like Kobe, what he's doing post retirement. It's an exciting time because they understand their brand has power and their money can then be put to use to create opportunities in the economy. So I'm excited at the transformation.
Now, I really wish we could keep going with the panel discussion. It's been really interesting, but the startups, I know there's a time crunch with a few of them, so we got to get going. But thank you very much, everyone. It was really interesting.